This story is titled, I Am Deaf, but my golden brother and my wife used that to stole my inheritance. But karma had other plan. Hey everyone, we put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what I do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey Reddit, let me take you back to where it all began. My name's Dan, and my life was pretty normal. Until it wasn't. Growing up, my family wasn't what you'd call perfect, but we were close. My dad, Mark, was the kind of guy who could fix anything. Cars, roofs, or a bad mood. He didn't just build things. He built relationships. That's why his construction company, Markwell Builders, wasn't just successful. It was a family legacy. Then there was my brother, Michael. Picture the golden boy. Tall, charismatic, with this ability to make everyone love him within 5 minutes of meeting him. People adored Michael, but he had a knack for overshadowing me. You see, I was born deaf. While my parents did everything they could to make life easier for me, Michael always treated me like I was some fragile little bird that needed constant protection. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate my brother. We were just different. Where he thrived on attention, I thrived on solitude. I loved working with my hands, just like Dad. I found peace in the quiet rhythm of tools and machines. While Michael was busy being the star of every family gathering, I'd be in the garage tinkering with blueprints or fixing up Dad's old truck. When Dad passed away last year, it felt like my world had been flipped upside down. He was my anchor. Losing him wasn't just personal. It also left a massive void in the company. Dad built Markwell Builders from the ground up, and now it was up to Michael and me to carry it forward. Dad's will was straightforward. Michael and I were to split the company 50-50. It seemed fair, right? But it wasn't just about numbers, it was about trust. And in hindsight, maybe Dad trusted Michael a little too much. Michael and I agreed to divide responsibilities. He'd handle the business side, client meetings, networking, and marketing. I'd oversee operations, making sure our projects were up to Dad's standards. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it was a recipe for disaster. Michael was, how do I put this? Reckless. He loved grand gestures, throwing money at big marketing campaigns, cutting corners to finish projects faster, and hosting lavish dinners to impress clients. Meanwhile, I was the one who'd have to deal with the fallout. Unhappy workers, botched plans, and budgets that didn't add up. Still, I kept my head down and focused on my part. I wanted to honor Dad's legacy, even if it meant cleaning up after Michael. Around this time, Sophia entered the picture. She was Michael's secretary, a stunning woman with sharp wit and a smile that could melt ice. I'll admit, the first time I met her, I was struck. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Michael was quick to notice my interest. You should ask her out, he'd said one day, grinning like a cat who'd just caught a mouse. She's perfect for you, Dan. Trust me. I hesitated. Dating wasn't something I'd done much of. Growing up deaf in a hearing world made me feel disconnected sometimes. But Michael was persistent, and Sophia, she was kind, understanding, and patient in a way that felt rare. Sophia and I started dating. She made an effort to learn sign language, which meant the world to me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone truly saw me, not as Michael's brother or the deaf guy, but as Dan. Within months, we were married. Looking back, I'll admit it felt fast. But at the time, it seemed like everything was finally falling into place. Michael was thrilled, or so he said. He even offered to help us settle into married life, saying things like, "We're family. We've got to look out for each other." But cracks started forming almost immediately. Sophia began spending more time at the office with Michael, claiming they were streamlining operations or going over client proposals. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, she was part of the company now, and Michael had always been the outgoing, business-savvy one. Still, something felt off. While Sophia and Michael were busy playing power couple at the office, I noticed small changes in how things were run. Sophia started questioning my decisions, suggesting I leave the details to the experts. Michael backed her up, saying I should focus on what I was good at, managing construction projects. Then came the paperwork. Sophia and Michael started pushing me to sign documents I didn't fully understand. They assured me it was for the company's benefit, that it would streamline processes and protect my interests. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I signed. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was slowly signing away control of my half of the company. At home, Sophia became distant. She started working late more often, claiming the company needed her. I wanted to believe her, but the whispers and glances between her and Michael were becoming harder to ignore. One night, I found myself alone in the house, scrolling through old photos of Dad. I missed him so much it hurt. He would have known what to do. He would have seen through whatever game Sophia and Michael were playing. But I wasn't Dad. I was just Dan, the quiet, dependable brother who always stayed in the background, or so they thought. It all started with the little things. Sophia stopped signing as much around me. At first, I thought she was just tired or stressed from work, but then there were the times when I'd walk into a room and she'd quickly put her phone down or end a video call. Once, I caught her laughing with Michael in the kitchen. I couldn't hear them, of course, but their body language said it all. Leaning in close, heads tilted together, like they shared some inside joke. When I walked in, they both froze. Michael recovered quickly, flashing his trademark grin. "Hey, little bro!" He signed dramatically, like he always did when he wanted to seem cheerful. "We were just talking about the next big client meeting. You should swing by." Sophia avoided my eyes, muttering something under her breath I couldn't read. I didn't push. Maybe I should have, but when you're deaf, you get used to missing pieces of conversations. People forget to sign, or they wave you off with, "It's nothing important." Sophia started coming home later and later. She'd text me, short messages like, "Working late with Michael," or "Big project, don't wait up." She rarely offered details, and when I'd ask her about it, she'd just smile and say, "It's for the company. You know how it is." I tried to believe her. I wanted to believe her. But one night, I decided to drop by the office. I didn't text her first. I wanted to surprise her with coffee and snacks. Just a little gesture to remind her I cared. When I walked in, the place was dark except for the light coming from Michael's office. Their shadows danced on the frosted glass. They were close. Too close. I stood there watching as Sophia reached out and brushed a piece of lint off Michael's shoulder. They weren't working. My hands clenched around the coffee tray, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of being deaf. I couldn't storm in and demand answers. I couldn't overhear their conversation to confirm my suspicions. All I could do was stand there, invisible and ignored. When Michael noticed me, his expression shifted. Guilt, then his usual charm. He waved me over, signing, "Dan, you should have told us you were coming. We were just wrapping up." Sophia turned, her face unreadable. "You should be home," she signed, her movements stiff and deliberate. I didn't respond. I just handed them the coffee, forced a smile, and left. A few weeks later, Sophia handed me a stack of papers. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "These need your signature," she said, signing the words lazily, like she couldn't be bothered to translate properly. "What's this for?" I signed back. "Just some legal stuff for the company." "It's routine," she replied, brushing me off. Michael leaned against the doorframe, watching us. "Don't stress, Dan. Sophia's got it all under control. You don't need to worry about the boring stuff." I hesitated. The papers were full of legal jargon I didn't understand. I felt stupid for not knowing what I was looking at, but Michael was quick to reassure me. "Come on, little bro. Do you really think I'd screw you over?" I hated how much I wanted to trust him. So, I signed. A few days later, I noticed Sophia's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, so I glanced at the screen out of curiosity. The message was from Michael. Period. "We'll have it all soon. He doesn't suspect a thing." My blood ran cold. I took a photo of the message with my phone, my hands shaking. Then, I started looking through the paperwork I'd signed. I couldn't make sense of most of it, but one line stood out. Transfer of shares. I felt sick. They weren't just keeping secrets. They were stealing from me. That night, I sat at the dining table with the photo of her text and the paperwork spread out in front of me. When Sophia came home, she froze, her eyes darting between me and the documents. "What's this?" I signed, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed her arms, her face a mask of defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about." I slid my phone across the table, showing her the photo of Michael's text. Her face drained of color. "It's not what it looks like," she signed quickly, her hands trembling. "Then what is it?" I signed back, my movements sharp and demanding. For the first time, Sophia didn't have an answer. The next day, I went straight to Michael's office. He was sitting at his desk, typing away, when I walked in and dropped the paperwork in front of him. "What's this?" I signed, glaring at him. Michael leaned back in his chair, his smile faltering. "Dan, let's not get dramatic. This is all just a misunderstanding." I pulled out my phone and showed him the text I'd taken from Sophia's phone. His face hardened, and for the first time, I saw the real Michael. The one who didn't care about me. Only what he could take from me. You don't understand business, Dan, he signed dismissively. I was protecting you. You're too soft for this world. My hands trembled as I signed back. You weren't protecting me. You were stealing from me. Michael shrugged, his smile returning. What are you going to do about it? You can't even hear half the things happening around you. How do you think you'll prove anything? Michael's words stung, but they also lit a fire in me. He thought my deafness made me weak, that I couldn't fight back, but he'd underestimated me. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked out of his office, my mind racing. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to make them both pay. After confronting Sophia and Michael, things didn't explode like I'd imagined. No dramatic arguments, no screaming matches, just silence. Deafening silence. Sophia stopped coming home altogether for a few days. When I texted her, her replies were short and cold. At work. Busy. Don't wait up. Let's talk later. Michael, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. He'd wave when I saw him at the office, his grin as fake as ever. But his eyes, there was something in them now. A challenge, maybe. Like he was daring me to figure out what he was hiding. Being deaf in a hearing world can feel isolating at the best of times. Now, it was suffocating. Every glance exchanged between Sophia and Michael felt like a conversation I couldn't hear. Every smirk or side-eye felt like a secret they were keeping from me. I started to notice how often Sophia and Michael coincidentally left meetings when I joined. I'd walk into the office kitchen, and they'd abruptly stop talking, their hands awkwardly still, no signing, no gestures, just nothing. It wasn't just them. The staff seemed uncomfortable around me too. Conversations would drop to whispers as I approached. Were they in on it? Did they know something I didn't? I felt like I was walking through a world that was muffled and distorted, and no one was willing to clue me in. I decided I needed help. I wasn't going to sit around and let them pull the wool over my eyes, or in my case, keep me in the dark. I reached out to my dad's old lawyer, Mr. Graham. He was an older man, someone my dad had trusted for years. I sent him an email explaining my concerns and attached copies of the paperwork I'd signed. When we met, he frowned as he looked over the documents. He tapped the line about the transfer of shares and pointed to the fine print. You see this clause? He signed slowly, making sure I understood. This essentially gives them control of your shares. You've retained some voting rights, but they can act on your behalf without your explicit consent. My stomach dropped. I signed back frantically. How do I fix it? Graham hesitated. It's complicated. We need evidence to prove coercion or fraud. Otherwise, it's legally binding. The next few weeks were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Sophia came home sporadically, her presence more like a ghost haunting the house than a partner sharing it. When she was there, she avoided eye contact and rarely signed. Michael, on the other hand, became bolder. He'd show up at my office unannounced, leaning casually against the doorframe. Hey, little bro, he'd sign with a smug grin. You okay? You've been looking stressed lately. I couldn't shake the feeling he was toying with me, like he knew I was trying to figure things out but was confident I never would. One day, I decided to dig through the company's financial records. If Michael and Sophia were up to something, there had to be a paper trail. But trying to untangle the mess they'd made was like trying to read a book written in a language I didn't understand. I spent hours poring over invoices, contracts, and bank statements, but nothing jumped out at me. Frustrated, I reached out to one of the company's accountants, Lisa. When I walked into her office, she looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with the pen on her desk. Is everything okay? I signed. She nodded quickly, but her expression said otherwise. She scribbled something on a notepad and slid it across the desk. You need to be careful. Things aren't what they seem. What do you mean? I signed, my movements sharp and insistent. Lisa hesitated, then shook her head, scribbling another note. I can't say more. Just watch your back. That night, I sat alone in the house, staring at the pile of paperwork on the dining table. My head was spinning, trying to piece everything together. I felt like I was drowning in questions with no answers. I felt like I was failing. The silence was crushing. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but no one was there to hear me. As the days went on, Sophia and Michael's behavior only got stranger. They seemed jumpy. Sophia would glance over her shoulder every time she walked into a room. Michael's smile didn't seem quite as confident anymore. They knew I was onto them, and that meant I was running out of time. This is where things start to click. Slowly but surely, I began uncovering the truth. And let me tell you, it wasn't pretty. At this point, I'd stopped trying to confront them directly. Every time I asked Sophia about her late nights, or pressed Michael about the company, they'd brush me off with carefully crafted answers. Instead, I decided to observe. I may not be able to hear, but I can see. And when people think you're not listening, they get sloppy. My first break came from an unlikely source, an overheard conversation, but not in the traditional sense. One afternoon, I walked into Michael's office unannounced. He was leaning back in his chair, Sophia perched on the edge of his desk. They were deep in discussion, their gestures animated. They didn't notice me right away, so I lingered by the doorway, pretending to check my phone. I watched their hands carefully, catching snippets of their signing. Bank account, client fund, doesn't know. I couldn't piece it all together, but it was enough to raise alarms. Whatever they were talking about, it wasn't innocent. When they finally noticed me, Sophia's face turned pale. Michael recovered quickly, flashing his usual grin. Dan, what brings you here? I signed back, keeping my movements calm. Just wanted to check in on the next project timeline. Everything's under control, Michael replied, waving me off. You should relax more. Trust us. We've got this. I nodded, pretending to accept his answer. But inside, I was already making plans. I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who could help me navigate the murky waters of corporate finances. So, I reached out to an old friend from college, Ryan. He was a tech wizard and had helped me out with coding projects before. When I explained the situation, Ryan didn't hesitate. Send me everything you've got, he typed in our text chat. I'll see what I can dig up. Over the next week, Ryan worked behind the scenes, combing through the company's digital records. Every so often, he'd send me cryptic updates. Found something weird in the expense reports. Do you recognize this account number? Finally, one night, he called me via video chat. His face lit up with excitement. Dan, I think I've got it, he signed. Ryan explained that he'd found a pattern in the financial records. Large sums of money were being funneled from the company's accounts into a private account under Sophia's name. The transactions were cleverly disguised as vendor payments and project expenses. Here's the kicker, Ryan signed, his hands moving quickly. Michael's name is on some of the authorizations. They've been working together to siphon money from the company. My stomach churned. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was theft, plain and simple. They were gutting the business Dad had built, the one he'd trusted us to run. Armed with this new information, I knew I needed proof that couldn't be denied. Ryan and I devised a plan to catch them red-handed. The next day, I approached Sophia at home. I want to help more with the finances, I signed casually. Michael's been saying I should take on more responsibility. Her expression flickered, surprise, then suspicion, but she recovered quickly. That's great, she signed back with a tight smile. I'll let Michael know. Sure enough, Michael called me later that evening. Dan, are you sure about this? Finances aren't your thing. I want to learn, I signed, keeping my expression neutral. It's important to me. Reluctantly, he agreed. Over the next week, I made a show of reviewing the accounts Michael and Sophia gave me access to. Of course, these were the sanitized ones, carefully curated to make everything look above board. But Ryan was feeding me information in real time. Using the access I'd been given, he managed to track down the private account and link it directly to the suspicious transactions. The final piece of the puzzle came when Ryan discovered an upcoming transfer scheduled for the following Friday. A large sum of money set to disappear into Sophia's account. Dan, he signed during one of our calls, his face serious. This is it. You catch them in the act, and they can't deny it. Friday arrived, and I could barely focus. I pretended to go about my day as usual, but my heart was racing. I stayed late at the office, waiting for Michael and Sophia to make their move. Sure enough, around 8 p.m. they showed up. I watched from the shadows as they logged into the system together, their hands moving quickly over the keyboard. Michael glanced around, then signed to Sophia, "This is the last one. After this, we're clear." Sophia nodded, her expression tense. I stepped into the room just as they hit confirm on the transfer. Their heads snapped toward me, shock and panic written all over their faces. "What are you doing here?" Michael signed, his movements sharp and defensive. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed them the live feed Ryan had set up, capturing every move they'd just made. There I was, standing in Michael's office with my phone in hand, the live feed from Ryan on the screen. Michael froze, his hands hovering mid-air, like he was deciding whether to deny everything or go on the offensive. Sophia, on the other hand, turned pale, her eyes darting between me and the monitor. "What is this?" Michael signed, his movements jerky, a mix of anger and panic. I didn't sign back right away. Instead, I tapped the screen, replaying the moment they initiated the transfer. Their faces were illuminated by the monitor clear as day. Sophia finally broke the silence, signing frantically. "You don't understand? This isn't what it looks like?" I stared at her, my hands still at my sides, refusing to respond. I wanted her to feel every second of my silence. It was more powerful than anything I could have signed. Michael, always the smoother talker, tried to regain control. "Look, Dan, this isn't as bad as it seems. You're making a big deal out of nothing. This is business. Complicated stuff you wouldn't understand." That was his mistake. Thinking I was too naive, too limited to understand what was happening. I didn't confront them further in that moment. Instead, I walked out, leaving them to stew in their own panic. As soon as I was in the hallway, I texted Ryan, "They're caught! Pull the trigger!" Within minutes, Ryan had sent the evidence to my lawyer, Mr. Graham, as well as a trusted board member who had been with the company since my dad founded it. By morning, the board would know everything. The next day, I called an emergency meeting with the board. Michael and Sophia weren't expecting it. They walked in looking smug, as if they thought they'd managed to charm their way out of the situation. But their confidence didn't last long. Graham opened the meeting by presenting the evidence. The transfers, the private account, and screenshots of the conversations Ryan had intercepted. The board members, many of whom had known my dad for years, were visibly furious. "This isn't just unethical," one of them said, his voice shaking as he read through the documents. "This is outright theft." Michael's face hardened, and he finally dropped the charm. "This is ridiculous," he signed, his movements sharp and defensive. "You're going to believe him over me? I've been running this company while he's been sitting in the background." I couldn't stay silent anymore. I stood up, signing slowly and deliberately, making sure everyone in the room understood. "You didn't run this company. You ran it into the ground. You've been stealing from the business, from the people who trusted us, from our family. Dad left this company to both of us, and you spat on everything he built." Sophia tried to interject, but one of the board members cut her off. "We've seen enough. This is beyond repair." By the end of the meeting, Michael and Sophia were stripped of their positions. The board voted unanimously to remove Michael as co-CEO, effective immediately. Sophia, who had no official claim to the company, was banned from the premises. Michael tried to argue, shouting and signing about his rights and inheritance. But Graham calmly reminded him that his actions violated the terms of his ownership, leaving the board with no choice but to take legal action. As security escorted him out of the building, Michael turned to me, his face a mix of rage and desperation. "You think you've won?" he signed, his movements wild. "This isn't over, Dan. You're nothing without me. Nothing." I didn't flinch. I simply signed back. "Watch me." The days that followed were exhausting. I worked closely with Graham and the board to stabilize the company. Clients needed reassurance, employees needed answers, and the financial mess Michael and Sophia had created needed untangling. I wasn't alone, though. Ryan continued to help from behind the scenes, and Lisa, the accountant who'd warned me earlier, stepped up to assist. She was instrumental in helping us trace every stolen dollar and begin the process of recovering the funds. One of the hardest parts was facing the employees. Many of them had trusted Michael, believed in his charm and leadership. When the truth came out, it shook their faith in the company. At a staff meeting, I stood in front of them, nervous but determined. I signed my speech while Lisa interpreted for the hearing employees. "I know this has been a difficult time," I began. "Many of you feel betrayed. So do I. But my father built this company on trust, integrity, and hard work. Those values haven't changed, and as long as I'm here, they never will." The room was quiet, but I could see nods of agreement. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Of course, Michael wasn't going to go quietly. He hired a lawyer and began fighting the board's decision, claiming he was unfairly removed. He also started spreading rumors, trying to paint me as incompetent and unfit to lead. But the evidence was against him. Every court filing, every public statement he made only dug his hole deeper. Meanwhile, Sophia disappeared. No texts, no emails, no sign of her anywhere. Part of me was relieved. I didn't want to see her face again, but another part of me wondered what she was planning. By the end of it all, I was exhausted. The company was stabilizing, the legal battles were underway, and Michael was scrambling to save himself. Once on a rainy Friday night, I remember it vividly because I was still at the office, finishing up a proposal for a new client. The storm outside was relentless, the kind that rattles windows and turns streets into rivers. Michael had been quiet for a few days. Too quiet. After his removal from the company, I knew he was plotting something, but I didn't know what. Sophia had vanished completely, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions and bad memories. Around 9 p.m., I got a text from Ryan. "Just heard from Lisa. Michael's been trying to access company accounts again. Be careful. I sighed, my frustration bubbling to the surface. When would he give up? Unbeknownst to me at the time, Michael wasn't just plotting, he was panicking. Losing the company had hit him hard, but it was the public fallout that really sent him spiraling. His reputation was in shambles, and his charm wasn't enough to fix it. That night, he and Sophia met up at a high-end restaurant downtown. Witnesses later told me they were arguing, gesturing wildly, their voices raised loud enough for nearby tables to notice. "I gave up everything for this!" Sophia reportedly shouted, slamming her glass on the table. "And you think I didn't?" Michael shot back. "Do you know how hard I worked to build this? And now it's all gone because of him." Their fight continued as they left the restaurant. By then, the rain had turned the roads into slick, dangerous paths. Michael, always the arrogant one, insisted on driving. Witnesses said he was speeding, his car weaving through traffic with reckless abandon. Sophia was in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, her face a storm of anger and frustration. As they approached a sharp turn on the highway, something went wrong. Maybe Michael misjudged the curve. Maybe the rain was too heavy. Or maybe, just maybe, karma decided it was time. The car skidded, tires screeching as it hydroplaned across the wet asphalt. Michael lost control, and the vehicle slammed into the guardrail with a sickening crunch. The impact sent the car flipping, tumbling down an embankment before coming to a stop in a ditch. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the scene was grim. The car was mangled, its roof crushed like a soda can. Michael survived the crash, but not unscathed. He suffered multiple fractures, a concussion, and a spinal injury that left him temporarily immobile. He was rushed to the hospital, his life hanging by a thread. Sophia, however, wasn't as lucky. The passenger side had taken the brunt of the impact, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. I found out about the accident the next morning. A call from one of the board members woke me up. They sounded shaken. "Dan," they said, their voice trembling. "There was an accident last night. Michael's in the hospital. Sophia didn't make it." I sat there, the words sinking in like stones. I didn't know how to feel. Relief? Grief? Justice? It was a swirl of emotions I couldn't untangle. The accident was just the beginning of Michael's unraveling. While he was recovering in the hospital, the legal system caught up to him. With the evidence Ryan and Graham had gathered, the board filed a lawsuit for embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. He didn't have the resources to fight back. His assets were frozen, his reputation obliterated, and his charm couldn't save him anymore. It's strange, isn't it? How life has a way of balancing the scales. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I just wanted the truth. But karma? She works on her own timeline. Michael and Sophia thought they could outsmart everyone, that they could take what wasn't theirs and walk away unscathed. But in the end, their greed and arrogance were their undoing. Now, I'm focused on rebuilding the company. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Every day, I'm reminded of my dad's values: honesty, integrity, and hard work. And every day, I strive to honor them. As for Michael, I haven't seen him since the accident. Word is he's moved out of state, trying to start over. But no matter where he goes, he'll carry the weight of his choices. And me? I'm finally free. Free from their lies, their schemes, and their shadows. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride, Reddit. It's been cathartic to share, and I hope it's a reminder to everyone. No matter how dark things get, the truth always finds a way to shine through. Karma may take her time, but she never forgets.